are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time to talk about all matters relating to estate planning and trust and estate administration, both from the standpoint of your own situation as well as for professionals like me who help people with their estate plans and the administration of estates and trusts. So today I'm going to be talking about leaving a legacy through charitable giving that's in your estate plan. And I think hopefully a lot of estate planning attorneys talk about this. I haven't been able to get a sense of how often they do. I think many times, unless the person who's having the estate plan done raises the question, I'm not sure it gets discussed. But I think it is important, no matter what the size of your estate. So you may have a fairly modest estate, and yet you may have some very profound wishes in terms of leaving some kind of legacy by making some final charitable donations. And so, it's important that those be embedded into your estate plan. So, there are many different vehicles for doing so, and I'm going to talk about some of those. I'm going to start out by reminding everybody I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, so I'm not giving either legal or accounting advice. This is just general information for you so that you can understand what some of your options may be. And then from there, I encourage you to talk to your advisors and work with them to make sure that your wishes get fulfilled. So I want to start by talking about why you may want to make why you want to make charitable giving have that be a part of your estate plan. And I think that first of all, there's personal fulfillment. You may have been a long-term donor to a particular charity, and again, no matter what the scale of that donation, it's important. Now, speaking as someone who's been involved in numerous charitable organizations, oftentimes it's not the size of a contribution that is the sole value of that contribution. So what's also important is the fact that a contribution is being made, because the number of donors supporting a cause it is important, especially if that organization is going out and writing for grants from grantor organizations. So that's an important consideration. So if you've been a long-time donor to a particular charity, so you count among those people, and you might be tempted to say, well, it's just me, only one out of tens, hundreds, thousands, no big deal. But in fact, if everybody takes that attitude, so then as the organization's current donor base starts dying off, the ability for that organization to raise money may be attenuated as well. And along with the number of people is the frequency of donations. So a lot of charities create plans where donors can make a small or a smaller monthly contribution as opposed to one annual contribution. And again, the number of people who do that and create that regular income stream for the organization can be very important. So while uh, grants as another source of income to a charity will sometimes allow a certain percentage of the grant to be used toward overhead, um, much of what is raised through grants cannot be used for overhead. So just the sort of cost of office space, keeping the lights on, so to speak, salaries for administrative people. Now, to delve into this just a little bit more, unfortunately, some charitable organizations use a very high percentage of their contributions toward overhead. I think that's problematic. So, and I'm not going to get into that too much, but if an organization, certainly 10% of an organization's contributions toward overhead is frankly outstanding. Most organizations, their overhead is not that low, but even 15 or 20% is, in many cases, would be quite reasonable. Having said that, raising those overhead funds can be difficult, and that's why charities start programs where people can make monthly contributions. Typically, those monthly contributions are going to sustain the regular overhead of the organization, office space, again, office space, administrative personnel, etc. So they can be very important for the survival of the charity. So, uh, you know, continuing to make those contributions and continuing to make them with the same frequency as you did when you were alive can be an important component of your estate plan. So it can also help you preserve your legacy. So in Judaism, there's a thought or a philosophy that um, a, while a person may have died, um, they remain alive in the minds and hearts of their family, their loved ones, friends, and that can include a charitable organization. So it's a way of keeping your memory alive, of making sure that which you valued is continued to be supported. So um, again, if you have religious beliefs or other personal beliefs, if you feel very strongly about taking care of animals, for example, um, making sure that the charities that you have historically supported, or maybe you're going to find a new charity, something like that aligns with your beliefs. So making sure they're supported as part of your estate plan can be very, very beneficial, and can hopefully give you some comfort as you face, this sort of inevitable event in our lives, that of, as Shakespeare said, shuffling off this mortal coil. So I think those are the benefits of charitable giving in your estate plan, and there are several ways to do these to do the charitable giving. So first of all, you can make a specific bequest in a will or a trust. So these typically take the form of some sort of fixed amount. So, for example, you might give, $1,000. I'm just using that number, $1,000 to your church or synagogue. Upon your death, that might be in your will, or if you have a trust. Okay, you can do the same. You can put that same bequest in your trust, and then your trustee is obligated to see to it that that bequest is fulfilled. You can also leave specific assets to a charity, and I'm going to talk about the tax benefits of doing that. But you may have a car, and your beneficiaries may all have cars, and so there's no necessity of leaving them another vehicle. You can leave it to a charity, and they can sell it, or maybe they can make use of it. Maybe they maybe you have a minivan or an SUV or something, and they can make use of it. Maybe the charity is something involving senior citizens or children, and they need to be transported, and so your vehicle could be used to do that. That's just one type of asset. You can leave certain portions of your of any securities that you have, stocks, bonds, etc. You could leave a specific bank account, again, furniture, whatever it is that you have. If it will benefit the charity, you could leave it to them. I know for myself, I have a large library of books on World War II, and one of the things I'm thinking about doing is finding a World War II museum that might like to have the books. So, because I'm not under any illusion that anyone I would leave them to would like to have them. I think I'm one of the few people alive who still likes, books and paper books and hardcover books. But in any event, you may have a collection of something, and your children may have no interest in that. And so but there may be an organization that would really like to have that as part of their legacy or as part of their mission. And so, you could make that bequest in your will or trust as well. So that's one, and that's a very straightforward way of doing things. Um, I would add that you also could make some of these donations prior to your death, if you're looking to downsize your life. And if you recall the 2 or 3 shows I did with Hillary Cooper at Uncluttered, that was one of the things she mentioned was one of the ways of downsizing is perhaps donating some things to charity while you're still alive, and it can still be thought of as part of your estate planning. Okay, so you can also make a residual bequest. So this would be a percentage of your estate after other distributions are made. So, perhaps, you're going to distribute. By the way, I don't recommend this, frankly, but perhaps you're going to distribute, a house that you own to one heir, and a securities portfolio to another one, and you're going to have some, I don't know, bank accounts left or whatever, and you may say, okay, and so 25% of the balance of my estate after these distributions will go to the following charity. That's one way of handling it as well. Okay, certainly if you're going to do any kind of residual bequest, you want to make sure that it's set up in a way that's not going to cause disputes. And the distribution I just suggested, where one asset goes to one heir and another asset goes to another heir, that's really it's really ripe for causing disputes if any assets have to be sold prior to your death. So I can't encourage you enough to get sound advice when when you're setting up your estate plan in terms of how you're dividing up your estate among your heirs. Okay, but a residual bequest is another way of seeing to it that there's some kind of charitable giving, in your estate plan. Okay, so bequests in a will or trust, whether it's a specific or residual bequest, that's one way of handling things. Another way of handling things is what's called a charitable remainder trust. So, a charitable remainder trust provides income to beneficiaries for the beneficiary's life or for a specific term of years. And then the remaining assets in the trust go to the charity when the term of the trust ends. Okay, so the trust becomes a separate entity. Okay, and you transfer, you may have again a securities portfolio, and it may be generating a certain amount of income each year, and that you may distribute that income to your heirs, or or whomever your beneficiaries are, and it may be for how long they live. It may, until they die, or it may be they're going to get it for 10 years or 20 years. Maybe they're your children, and you want to make sure that your children have there's adequate funds for your children to be raised, go to college, go get set up in a business, go to a trade school, whatever it is. And then, once they're, kind of set up, it may be that you don't want them to continue to, get an income. You want them to stand on their own feet. And so at the end of the term of the beneficiaries getting the income from the charitable remainder trust, then what's left in terms of assets goes to the charity. Okay. And especially if you have a larger amount of assets, this can be a very good way of both benefiting your heirs or your your beneficiaries, as well as making a potentially large charitable contribution. Okay, the sort of the flip side of that is something called a charitable lead trust. And in this case, the charity gets the income from the trust for a set period of time. And then after that period of time ends, the your remaining assets go to your beneficiary. Okay, so charitable remainder trust, your beneficiaries get the income, the charity gets what's left after at the time the trust term ends. Charitable lead trust, the charity gets the income for a period of years, for whatever the term of the trust is, and when the trust term ends, then your beneficiaries get the money. So they're kind of opposite sides of the same coin, you might say. Okay, now, both of these are more sophisticated estate planning. They're more sophisticated estate planning vehicles. Okay, and so they are going to take working with an estate planning attorney to set them up. You're probably going to need to have some sort of financial advisor involved as well. So especially if it's going to be any kind of financial assets, whether it's bank accounts, again, securities, whatever you fund the trust with, all of that needs to be thought out in advance to make sure it's all set up in a way that it's actually going to work according to your wishes once you pass away. Okay, so again, charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust. The distinction between the two is really who gets the income and who gets the remaining assets after the trust term ends. Okay, so I want to take a break here for just a couple of moments, and I want to mention that first of all, this is Trust and Estates Weekly. And one of the Way to Wow shows. We're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about matters relating to estate planning and trust and estate administration. And especially if you're a professional, you may want to consider joining my LinkedIn group called Trust and Estates Experts. And this is a group of people who, from all sort of walks of life within the estate planning and administration area. And we have a group where you can post a question, especially if it's something out of your area of expertise. So maybe you're a lawyer and you have an accounting question, or vice versa. So you can post a question, and people in the group, as a matter of professional courtesy, will respond to your questions. Also, if you, like me, develop content related to estate planning and trust and estate administration, so this is another place where you can get exposure for your content. I have a couple of people who pretty regularly post in the group, and their topics are always of interest. One is Lori Israel, who does prenuptial agreements, which, although isn't exactly estate planning per se, can play a role in it depending on what the situation is. So if you'd like to be a member of Trusts and Estates Experts, my LinkedIn group. Just go to LinkedIn, search that name, click on the button asking to be admitted to the group, and I will admit you and would love to have you in the group. Okay, so again, Trusts and Estates Experts on LinkedIn. So going back now to our discussion about charitable giving through estate planning, leaving a legacy. I talked about two ways of making charitable contributions. One is a bequest in a will or trust. Another is a charitable remainder trust or a charitable lead trust, okay, which are separate vehicles that you set up to do your charitable giving. Another is a donor advised fund. So in a donor advised fund, you make a contribution to a charity or to a foundation, and you receive an immediate tax benefit when you make the donation, and then you can recommend grants over time. So the end of last year, I believe it was December 23rd, I did a whole show on qualified charitable distributions and donor advised funds. And so I'm going to put a link to that show in the show notes for this episode. And if you are interested in having more information about donor advised funds, I invite you to check out my other show. Again, it goes in depth on this particular vehicle. And it can be less expensive to set up than a charitable remainder trust or charitable lead trust, because in essence, you're donating money to an organization that specifically handles making charitable donations essentially on your behalf. Okay, now there are certain restrictions and such, and that's why, again, if you're going to consider doing something like this, you're going to want to get accounting and legal advice to make sure it's all set up correctly and you don't end up, causing some sort of tax problem for yourself or for your estate. Okay, and then, excuse me, finally, the last option that I have here for charitable giving in your estate plan is beneficiary designations. So you may have a life insurance policy or a retirement account or a bank account or an investment account. All of those allow you typically to appoint what's called a beneficiary at death or on death. And what that means is the funds or securities in that account will go to the beneficiary at the time of your death. Now, it's not automatic. There's usually paperwork that has to be filled out, but the reality is a beneficiary on death designation happens outside of the probate process. And it also happens outside of your trust. So you don't have to rely on the trustee fulfilling your wishes. You don't have to rely on the administrator of your estate in probate if you're going that route to handle it. Basically, the beneficiary, and they should be told if they're a beneficiary on death, they contact the institution at which the account is housed or the insurance policy is held, and there's usually a separate department there to handle such things, and the people in that department will give them the paperwork that they need to fill out and sign. Usually requires a copy of a death certificate, a certified copy. Okay, and once all that paperwork is in, it usually doesn't take very long, and then the funds are distributed to the beneficiary. So you can make a charity a beneficiary on death. It doesn't have to necessarily be a natural person. Charities typically are organized, excuse me, as 501c3 organizations, typically a corporation. And so they too can be named a beneficiary on death. And again, this is a potentially excellent way to make sure that your charitable wishes are fulfilled without having to rely on a trustee or an administrator, personal representative to make sure it happens. Now, I know in my case as a professional fiduciary, when I have an account in an estate that has a beneficiary on death, I will help the beneficiary with the process of the paperwork. Pardon me. I'll help them with the paperwork. Most people are not, familiar with this process, and so they can use a helping hand. And it's just part of the service that I give as a professional fiduciary. But others may not handle it that way. They might just say, hey, you're a beneficiary on death. Here's the financial institution. Have at it, and good luck. But in any event, it is a way to again ensure that your charitable wishes are fulfilled. Okay, so those are some ways that you can actually the sort of the mechanics of making a charitable contribution in your estate plan. So next, I want to talk about the tax implications of charitable giving. Now, of course, your individual situation is going to be unique, and this is why you want to make sure you get proper accounting and legal advice. But in any event, like when you give a charitable contribution while you're alive, and you can get a tax deduction for that, although these days the automatic exemptions are so high it may not be relevant. But an estate too that makes a charitable contribution may get a reduction in the estate tax liability for that charitable deduction. And so, for example, you may have an estate that's worth $15 million, and you may be a single individual, and the exclusion from estate tax limit this year is probably going to be around $14 million. It was about 13.6 last year. So it would be somewhere around $14 million. So if you have a $15 million estate, you may be liable for estate taxes on the $1 million over and above the exclusion. So in that case, you may decide, you know what? For every dollar I give to the charity, I save 40 cents in estate taxes. So excuse me, if I give, I don't know, a $500,000 to a charity, right? 200,000 of that is basically money that otherwise would have gone to the federal government in the form of estate taxes. So you might be able to reduce your estate tax liability by making some charitable donations. Okay, there can also be potential income tax benefits for the heirs, and again, that'll depend on their particular tax situation. But if the estate, for whatever reason, doesn't need the charitable contributions, it may be possible to pass them to the heirs when the estate closes. Again, this is something that you need to get accounting and legal advice on. Okay, and then finally, there may be capital gains tax advantages to the estate by donating appreciated assets. So let's take that car that I mentioned earlier. Maybe it's a particularly nice car, and it's appreciated in value. Maybe it's some kind of collector's car. I don't know, a Ferrari or something like that, right? So in that case, you may have originally bought the car for, let's say, $150,000. Now it's worth $500,000, right? So, that donating that car there could be capital gains tax advantages to doing so. And again, this is a pretty sophisticated level of tax planning. So you'd want to get advice from from your accountant and your lawyer. And by the way, if they're not sophisticated enough to advise you on this, then look beyond them. You might consider, for example, contacting my friend Jacqueline Yu, and this would be the kind of thing that she'd be able to advise you on. Or for that matter, my friend Roy Gia, who's an accountant, handles estate tax returns, very complicated ones. Okay, so what is the right strategy? Well, first of all, you need to start out by assessing your financial and philanthropic goals. So, what do you want to do with your estate? Okay, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? And no one can answer that for you. That's something you're going to have to decide for yourself, or decide in conversation with your spouse if you're married, or your children, especially if you have adult children. Okay, all of this needs to be discussed, thought about, etc. And by the way, especially if you have adult children, I highly recommend that you discuss this with them, so that they understand your wishes, and they understand why you're doing it, so that hopefully they will not feel like, I don't know, you're slighting them, or you're reducing their legacy in favor of a charity or something like that. So you want to socialize it with them. And I'm not saying you need to get their consent. Of course you don't. But it's always better for potential heirs or actual heirs to understand your wishes. That can lead to that can tend to reduce the opportunity for conflict. Okay, so talk about it, think about it, get information on the various options. That's why I'm doing this show. Okay, and then after you've had some time to discuss it, talk to your advisors about it. Talk to your estate planner, your lawyer, your accountant, your financial advisors, and again, socialize with them your thinking in terms of charitable giving. You don't need to make decisions the first time you speak with them, but you do want to get their advice. They're going to know better your individual situation. And so they're going to be able to give you specific advice on what vehicles may work for you based on how large your estate is, based on what your other commitments may be. And so they can start narrowing down options, or maybe expanding options. Okay, this show isn't intended to be, exhaustive in terms of how to handle this. It's really designed to get you thinking about this as an aspect of estate planning. Okay, and then as you develop your plan, you want to ensure that your legal obligations, your tax obligations, your moral obligations are all aligned with with your wishes. Okay, and so the plans are going to evolve over time, and that's why really the sooner you get started with this, the better, because these are not decisions that you want to make quickly. You want to take time to think them through, to talk to other people, to reconsider, maybe have additional conversations, and really give it some time to stew until it germinates into a plan that really reflects your wishes. Okay, and so that's the strategy here. And then in terms of sort of actual implementation, so you want to identify the charities or the charitable organizations that you want to support. Okay, again, maybe, as I mentioned in the beginning, maybe it's an organization with which you've been involved for a long time. Great, so you know them. You may know the people involved. Terrific, and so you can bring them into the conversation. Maybe there's some new organization. So maybe your feeling is that, at the time you pass away, maybe your children are in, pretty good financial shape, and you don't have a spouse, or your spouse will be well provided for, and so you're going to have some additional funds for charitable giving. And that being the case, perhaps you want to consider more than one charity. Maybe you have more than one charitable interest, or maybe you want to spread, your contributions among more than one charity in the same area. Again, all of that's part of the thinking through process. So, but at some point, you're going to need to identify the actual charities that you want to support. You're going to want to go on to determine what is the best way to do so, what vehicle, whether it's again, a bequest, a trust, a donor advised fund, whatever you're going to do. Okay. And then, at that point, your legal and financial and accounting advisors are going to need to be consulted on the specifics of what you want to do, so that they can draft the documents that are necessary in order to make this part of your plan come to fruition at the proper time. And then, once the documents are set up, if you haven't done so previously, again, highly recommend that you communicate your intentions to your family, your beneficiaries, to the charities themselves, so that they know what's going on, and try and reduce potential conflict that would arise out of your plan. And so, again, going back to the core of today's show, and that is, I think many of us would like to leave some kind of legacy, and it's not money is a part of our legacy, but ideas, values are also a large part of our legacy. And so, if we're going to do that in the best way possible, then we need to think it through as part of our estate plan, and get clear in our own minds first and foremost, how we want to handle this, and then talk to those concerned, again, our family, beneficiaries, and our advisors, about what you think you want to do, what it's possible for you to do, what potential conflicts may arise, so that your wishes can be best fulfilled. And again, I encourage you to get started on this as soon as possible, because the more time you have to consider it, the better your plan can be. So, charitable giving through estate planning, it can create a lasting legacy for you. I know one of the organizations that I was involved with for many, many years is called Step Up on Second. It was started by a woman named Susan Dempsey. I met her many, many years ago at a service at my synagogue. She came to speak about taking care of the homeless. And I was so impressed by what she said, I called her up, I think the following week, and said, "Hey, I'm in the real estate business. If there's ever any way I can help you, I'd be happy to, pro bono." And interestingly enough, not too long after that, Susan called me, and she asked me if I could help them find another place to house themselves, because their current location was going to be torn down, and permanent housing for homeless people was going to be built on that site on 2nd Street in Santa Monica, hence the name Step Up on Second. And so it was an interesting situation, because you might think, well, Santa Monica, very favorable area for the homeless, and this is back in the late 1980s. I had a devil of a time finding someone who would rent them space. Finally did. We relocated them. They built their facility, moved back in, and the fee I got for finding them the space, I donated to the organization, just so they had some additional cash. And when they moved back into their new facility, they created a donor wall. And much to my surprise, I appeared on the donor wall for having, given them my fee. And this is a treat for me. Those of you who've seen my show, Jiggers' Place, one of my all-time favorite TV shows is Hogan's Heroes. So not far from my name on the donor wall was the name of Werner Klemperer, who plays Colonel Klink on Hogan's Heroes. What I didn't learn until many, many, many years later was that Werner Klemperer was Susan Dempsey's ex-husband, and they even after they got divorced, they stayed in touch, and he continued to support her work. So, from my perspective, to be on a donor wall with someone whose work I so admire and who was as charitable as Werner Klemperer was, it's for me, it's my legacy is being maintained. All I did was offer to help this charity out. So but I do find it very fulfilling that this is the case. And so again, I encourage you to think about it and take action if it's important for you to support charitable organizations. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And my topic is Pivot or Surrender. I'm going to be talking about the battle for Appomattox Courthouse, which you may recognize is a famous battle from the American Civil War. And so I hope you'll join me to learn what business lessons we can from this one of the last battles of the American Civil War. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And I'm going to be talking about how to dress for success. So I think it's very important. You can see the way I dress, right? So I'm somewhat old-fashioned, I guess. I wear a tie when I present to you out of respect for you, my viewers, and maybe that's passé nowadays. I would argue not. But in any event, I'm going to talk about the many issues there are to dressing for success. And then on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. And I'm going to be talking over a cocktail about biblical commandments. So the Jewish holiday of Passover starts Saturday night. So this is a kind of an auspicious time to talk about this particular issue. We call them commandments, but I would suggest to you that's really a shorthand term that's not particularly appropriate. So I hope you'll join me at Jiggers' Place on Thursday afternoon, or Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And then a week from today will be the next edition of Trust and Estates Weekly. So thank you so much again for joining me, especially my live guests. Really appreciate it. And wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Signing off as I always do. Marie, sorry, I was going to get them backwards. Marie, darling, you're my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.